Hi, everyone. I'm Julia. I'm a first year here at David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. Our panelists can turn their video and audio on. So we are Med Mentors. We are all first year medical students here, and we're hoping to help pre-med students at UCLA through sessions like these. And when COVID is over, we are hoping to have more in-person office hours on campus like we had before. So you can follow us on Instagram at UCLA Med Mentors or on Facebook with the same name. And then also be sure to follow the Pre-Health at UCLA Facebook page for all of our event info in the future. We have a few cool events coming up. This Thursday on 5/14, we have a medicine and art, creativity and healthcare panel. So we're gonna have some medical students talking about how different activities have influenced their life and how creativity and art can be incorporated in a career in medicine. So stay tuned for that. And then next week for Med Mentor Mondays, we have a When Things Go Wrong panel. So that's talking about kind of what we call the imperfect application. So if you have a low GPA or had to retake the MCAT or didn't get into an internship or a volunteer opportunity you wanted to get to overcome those obstacles and still have a really great med school application, because nobody's perfect. So stay tuned for that. So we're gonna just start by having the panelists go around and introduce themselves. Just say your name. We're all first years, so you can admit that. And then where you're from, and what are you doing during quarantine, I guess. We can start with Manny.
Hi, my name is Manny. I'm from the Bay Area originally, but I went to UCSD for undergrad and graduate school. And I'm currently trying to keep up with neurology during this block during quarantine.
All right, whoever wants to go next.
I can go. I'm Angela or Angie. I'm from Rancho Cucamonga, California, which is about an hour and a half east or so of UCLA. And what I'm currently doing is making a lot of food and taking care of my mom, who's just been diagnosed with shingles.
All right, Megan, you want to go?
Hi, everyone. I'm Megan. I am also from the Bay Area. I went to UC Berkeley, so not that far away. What have I been doing? It's really hard to keep track because time just seems to be moving along without me recognizing what's happening. So I guess I've been also trying to keep on top of school, but also trying to keep on top of my Netflix watch list. So it's been a good time.
Brittany, you want to go?
Sure. Hi, I'm Brittany. I'm also a first year from the Bay Area. I went to Duke for undergrad, and similarly, I've been trying to study, really making an attempt. We had our midterm just before this. And when I'm not studying, I've been baking. So this week, I made some apricot scones for Mother's Day. And then trying to catch up a bit on reading, which I don't usually make time for during like normal study time. So taking advantage.
Great. And last but not least, Louis.
My name's Louis. I'm from New York originally, been to UCSD for undergrad and a master. What I've been doing is I've been waking up at 1 or 2 p.m. and I have been YouTube procrastinating my entire almost half day, and then panicking before my sleep trying to clear my Anki cards. That's my daily life. So very not productive as my fellows.
Sounds good. Sounds good. And then we also have the help of Reza and Julia, who are kind of incognito helpers moderating the chat. So feel free to keep asking your questions there. We're going to start off by just asking some general questions about gap years. So for all of you, what did you do during your gap year? Whoever wants.
I'll go first. So I graduated in 2017. And then after I graduated, I decided that I'm going to take a gap year in the summer between my sophomore year and junior year, just to realize that I have a big portion of my activity is missing. Because back then I was under the mindset that, oh, you have to hit certain marks and you have to do certain things in order for you to get into medical school. And I realized that I don't have a lot of stuff that other people told me that I should have. So I decided to take one gap year, but I didn't really know what to do on my gap year. And then it was during my senior year that I decided that I'm going to do a BS-MS program at UCSD, where I will be enrolled as a master's student and will continue work in my lab and continue to finish my project and then finish that as a master's thesis. Well, I was a BS-MS student. I also did TA. So I also did a lot of TAing during that time as well. Also just to rank up my clinical hours and as well as do a little bit more other side projects. After that, I applied to medical school. So that will be my second year, which is the year that I actually applied to medical school. That's the year I interviewed and I traveled and I got accepted and then traveled the world for a nice little pleasure before coming to medical school.
That sounds lovely. Megan, do you want to share?
Sure. So I guess for me, my gap years were in some ways out of necessity because I wasn't 100% sure about the path I was taking, for one thing. So I hadn't taken my MCAT when I graduated, so I had to take time off to do that. And my main intention was to spend some time just like working. So I had a pretty like generic, I had a 9-to-5 job, I commuted to work, I did that whole thing. So I was doing clinical research at Stanford. I worked in a like GI oncology clinical research group. It was a really good experience, but definitely very much gave me the idea that I did want to go back to school, having done that. So I can say that I'm actually quite happy to be hitting the books and like studying and all of that because I genuinely missed it while working. And that was a really good learning experience for me. During that time that I was working, I was also volunteering at a free clinic because I went to UC Berkeley, so I kind of stayed in the same region and was able to kind of continue some of the activities that I was doing during undergrad, which was really great. And I think it was also a good time for personal growth. Working a 9-to-5 job, you have quite a bit of flexibility, and I read a ton of books and I spent a lot of time with my friends, and it was I guess a really nice break from studying and taking tests, which is something that I'd been doing literally for as long as I could remember at that point. So I genuinely got a year off where I wasn't thinking about school at all, and then applied to medical school after that 1 year. So that was really nice.
That's awesome. Brittany, do you want to share what you did?
Sure. So I took 1 year off. So I graduated and then I started writing my applications and stuff, and then had the application process during my gap year. I did a research program that's called Fulbright. So I was in Switzerland and I was working in a research lab studying drug delivery and drug development for an eye disease that I'd studied in college. So it was really nice for me. I didn't really realize how much I kind of needed a break from the school life. So I had basically a regular sort of a lab job. It's like 9 to 5 or 6 usually. It was pretty predictable. And then my evenings I could sort of do as I chose. So I like joined a run club. I took some French classes. I was volunteering. I really like children. So I was a sort of academic tutor for kids, that sort of thing. And I thought it was really nice shift from the school schedule. But then I still felt like it was pretty short. So I was kind of out of the classes for a year, but still kind of in the med school mode. And then I came back here. So it was a nice break, and sort of a change of pace, but still similar to the medical school world because it was with like medical research. I think, was that the question? Yes, I think I covered it.
Yeah. You guys all did such cool things. Manny, you want to talk about what you did?
Sure. So my journey was kind of longer than I expected or wanted it to be, but I think it worked out in the end. I ended up taking 3 gap years. What happened is I want to say winter of 2015, I realized I didn't have my act together as much as I wanted to. So I decided to do the BSMS program like Louis did. And then I was continuing my undergraduate research, but at the same time, I kind of realized I didn't have a lot to my application. So I did several things. I joined something called the Palomar Pathmaker internship, which is essentially like a pre-health internship where you go and volunteer under like nurses and doctors in different units. And then I kind of got involved with like charity work. So my friend had founded a charity called Get a Cane to help people who are disabled afford mobility aids. So I helped run that charity. And then I ended up trying to found or co-founded my own program in another charity called No One Left Behind, which basically sought to help people who were immigrants get jobs. And then while doing this, I was doing my master's work, finished the master's up 2017, late 2017. Studied for the MCAT again, because the first time I took it, I just didn't do as well as I wanted. So I had to take the MCAT twice. And then I wanted to say like somewhere in summer of 2018, I was at another crossroads deciding what I wanted to do with my third gap year, because I still had to go through the interview process and such. And I was between teaching for Kaplan or working for this company called Cortica, which worked with children with autism. So I did something completely different than anything I'd ever done, any kind of research or work or school. And I worked with kids with autism for a year. And then I started school here. And I really didn't know I would end up doing all those things in my journey, but I think all of them kind of shaped me. And I think it was important for me to be able to spend time outside of school to kind of make sure I was mature enough and knew that this is what I wanted to do. So I think in 2016, when I was 21 years old, I really wasn't sure, didn't understand what I was getting myself into. And that's for me. I mean, other people might know what they want to do, but it took me a lot of time and gap years to kind of figure out medicine was for me, and that's what I wanted to do.
That's great. I'm glad we have a range of people who have one gap year to many. Angie, what did you do?
Hi. So similar to Manny, I also took 3 gap years, although initially I planned to take 2 gap years. I was lucky because all throughout college, I knew that I wanted to go into medicine. And so I'd like taken all the classes and I'd done the MCAT and was feeling prepared for that. But I knew that even though med school or medicine was my eventual goal, I definitely had a lot more in the world that I wanted to see and experience and learn about outside of medicine. And that's just something that's really important to me. I just really enjoy like kind of knowing a bit about everything as much as possible. And so that like I definitely knew that I wanted to do stuff outside of medicine. So for my first gap year, I did something kind of similar to what Brittany did. I also did a Fulbright, but instead of doing research, I was actually teaching English for a year in Colombia. I was placed in a really small town, like no one really spoke English. And it was just a very, very, very different experience from my sheltered liberal arts college in Southern California experience. I enjoyed it a lot, and I met a lot of really, really cool people. And it was definitely one of the things that sort of shaped me in terms of pointing me towards the direction of medicine that I might be interested in the future. And so that was a really formative experience doing the Fulbright for a year. After that, I knew I wanted to go back to San Francisco. And I thought that like any good pre-med, I should probably go do some research thing because that's like a hot buzzword that like all my friends are doing and stuff. So I was like, right, research, let me find a lab. So I was working at a lab at UCSF for a while and just realized I didn't really like it very much. And I kind of had this crisis where I thought, you know, I'm so young, there's so much that I could be learning about in the world. Why do I feel confined to just working in this research lab where I don't think I'm being like utilized enough and I don't feel like I'm growing enough just as a person? And so through a random series of events, I reached out to a recruiter for a tech company in San Francisco, Mixpanel. They do data analytics for websites and mobile apps. And I sort of asked if they had any positions available. And they told me, no, we don't have any positions in San Francisco, but we do have some in London. And so I thought, you know, why not? Again, I'm young, nothing much to lose. Let's see if anything will become of this. So I went down the recruitment pathway, ended up getting the job, and again, was at this crossroads where I had to think about, is this exactly what I want? Does it matter? Like, can I just ride this wave and see what happens? At this point, I had already just about finished applying to med school. So I was getting interviews and kind of needed to be in the US for a while, but luckily, because I had extensive training for this job, I was able to work in the San Francisco office until my interview season had ended. And so after this, I moved out to London. This was about March. You know, I was thinking, med school starts in August. This means I would be in London for about 5 months. This isn't exactly what I want either. This feels really temporary. I'm used to just really being able to soak up everything in one place. So I thought, might as well see if I can apply for a deferral of matriculation. And so I did that through a process that is not super transparent, but I can shed more light on it if anyone's interested. I did that and ended up getting approved. And yeah, I just worked for like a tech startup in London, helping build out our office. When I got there, I was employee number 5. When I left, I was employee number 5 in Europe. When I left, I was like, there were like 60 or so employees in Europe. And so, yeah, it was really cool to get to build out a new office, kind of help strategize our global plan, and just learn about something that was completely different from anything I'd ever understood before. Yeah, it was an awesome experience. And like Manny, I think there was a lot of personal development and growth that I knew I wanted to do prior to entering into med school. I do feel like in many ways, jumping on this path, it's very hard to, take time off after you've started. And so for me, I knew that I definitely wanted to do as much as possible before I jumped on that train and couldn't really get off.
Yeah,
Thanks
once
so much,
you're in,
guys.
you're in.
Yeah. Well, that's great. It seems like you guys chose to do gap years for good reasons and enjoyed what you did. You guys briefly touched on the next question, which is what factors did you consider when deciding whether or not to take a gap year? We can kind of change this to be pros and cons that you recognize either when you were thinking about choosing a gap year or now having done one. What would you think are the major pros and cons of taking a gap year?
I'll go first. I think, like people have touched on, I think a lot of personal growth can happen when you work a job and you have a lot of time outside of that to just think about who you want to be as a person, what's important to you, maybe what eventual path you want your medicine to take you on. So there are lots of pros, obviously. One con that I will sort of mention is that having taken 3 gap years, I'm not as young and tender and supple as I used to be. And I do feel like having spent time outside of the medical field and outside of academia, it was definitely difficult for me to transition back personally. That's probably different for each person, but yeah, just working sort of a corporate 9 to 5-ish job was very different for me from studying. And that made coming back to med school a little bit more difficult, but not impossible.
And I think one of the things too, kind of building off what Angie said, is that when you do take gap years, it's important to have some kind of idea or mentorship of what you're going to do when you go in, because it's your own time. There's no one telling you you have to do this or have to do that. There's no one structuring and giving you an exact plan of what you need to do. It's kind of up to you as a person to figure out how to best use this time. And of course, you can find people along the way, but you don't want to waste time. You're taking gap years, you're going to watch your friends and colleagues get married and get jobs and move on with their lives or get accepted into medical schools and start. And you might have moments of doubt during that journey. So you kind of have to have a plan and a structure and remind yourself, okay, I'm doing these things and taking the gap years off for a certain reason so that I can achieve this goal.
Yeah, I think it's very important that when you decided to take a gap year, and if you're thinking that you are going to take a gap year, it's very important to plan out exactly what your milestones are during those gap years. Otherwise, because you are going to see your friends, especially the one in CS, and they're going to move on to like startups and start making a lot of monies, and you're going to be sitting here be like, oh my God, I don't even know where I'm going to go, why even going for medical school or not. So it's very important to have that milestone map laid out so you know that, okay, I'm on the path, I'm achieving what I want to do. That's very important.
One additional pro that I wanted to mention is we were talking a lot about the years after graduating, but taking gap years allows you to enjoy your undergraduate years, especially your last 2, more fully than you could if you were applying straight out. That was something that was really important to me, to like continue to be involved with things and continue to like build those relationships in undergrad and beyond. Which I think it depends on the person. Not everybody wants or needs that, but I think I really enjoyed that. And then to go off what both Manny and Louis said about, looking at other people being at different points in their lives, it definitely, the gap year phenomenon is very transitory. like you are going to feel that you are not as established as other people, and that does come into effect when, you know, even when you're talking to your friends or your family, and where you live and what job you can do and what you tell your coworkers. There are limits to what you can commit to with them and plans that you can make. So just keep that in mind as well. So it can be a little bit of burden sometimes.
I can speak a bit to debating whether or not to take a gap year. I originally, when I went to med school or college, I thought I wanted to be pre-med, and I took essentially all of my medical pre-med classes in the first 2 years. So I could have taken the MCAT and applied straight without taking a gap year. But I actually met with a advisor who sort of is reputed to like tell it to you straight, and she was saying that probably I should take a gap year because although I had sort of fulfilled the academic scientific requirements, I didn't necessarily have the clinical experience or the sort of extra academic experiences to show that I really knew what I was getting myself into, that I would be dedicated to medicine, that I would do well in medicine, and sort of those outside the classroom aspects that are really important in your application. I think it's a very personal choice. Some people are really ready to go to med school right after college, and that's amazing. So it is, I'm not trying to say either way is better. It's something you have to think about for yourself. But for me personally, looking back, I was pretty skeptical about taking any time off. I didn't really know why that would benefit me. But the things that I wrote about in my application, the things that I talked about during my interviews, and also the sort of way that I think about medicine now, is definitely has been shaped by experiences that I had during my senior year, during my gap year, that I probably wouldn't have had if I had been applying during that time while I was still in college. So I feel like everything that you go through sort of shapes your path. So there's no right way. They'll just be different. And I want to sort of stress that because I feel like it can feel like there's a singular track that you should follow, and that's really not true. As you can see, there's a lot of different ways that people have gotten to medicine, and we're all here in the same class and have different experiences to draw upon and aspects to sort of add to the community. So when I was thinking about whether or not to take a gap year, I think sort of weighing those, like, do you feel like your application would be stronger? Do you feel like you'd be more prepared to be in medicine if you took a gap year? Then maybe consider it. If you feel like you're ready and you're really sure that you want to go into medicine, definitely like going straight is a totally great option. And I think Julia can speak to that as well. I think she may be the resident straight through person here on the panel.
Yeah, I am the youngin here.
I did have, can I just add one more thing?
Yeah, please do.
Regarding pros and cons? I know it might seem like, I mean, I totally had this mentality when I was pre-med as an undergrad. I was thinking, you know, everything I do should really be catering to medicine. Like, I have to make sure that every step is sort of like painting this narrative of like someone who's really prepared. But I think ultimately what I've realized is that it's your life. You only have one. And so there are so many different types of doctors. Obviously, like not everyone has followed the same trajectory, and not everyone has the same values and has had the same journey. And yeah, ultimately this is the time that you have. And so don't feel constrained like, oh, you know, I have to follow a certain path or anything, or feel like you're in any sort of rush, because you really have so much time, and this is definitely a marathon, not a sprint. And you can just do what you would like.
Absolutely. It's all about making it your own journey. I did not take a gap year, so if you have questions about that, feel free to put it in the Q&A and I can address my perspective. But most of my friends from my undergrad did gap years, and I was kind of left to apply alone. And yeah, but it worked out. All right, guys, so we have another just preset question for you that comes from a lot of pre-meds. How do you know when your application is ready? And kind of trying to talk about at what point did you decide, okay, now is the time?
You're never going to feel ready. I didn't feel ready. You know, I think that even in medical school, there are times you don't feel adequate, don't feel like you've done enough. So, do the best you can and kind of ascertain where you are in your life. And it's a jump. You might never feel completely ready.
Yeah, I think the take a leap of faith is very real, because if you're just gonna keep checking yourself, compare yourself to that other friend that you heard about, that one person that you heard about, oh my, he did the amazing thing, she did the amazing thing, and then now they're here, and obviously I'm not them, and therefore I'm not going to go anywhere, I'm not going to get into any school. That friend, that is gone. Like, you need to just believe yourself. You're ready if you feel like, okay, I think I have done enough, that I have done what I feel like is enough. I don't care about what other people feel like. I think that medical school should see me as who I am right now. And I feel like who I am right now is ready to commit to medicine. If you can answer yourself firmly to that question, then you're probably ready.
Yeah, I would sort of echo what Louis said and just say that, I mean, it's just whenever you're ready to start studying, or rather, it's when you think you'll be ready in a year to start studying. And, if something doesn't work out and you find that there are more opportunities coming up, deferral is still definitely an option at a lot of different med schools. And so, if you feel at all maybe possibly ready, then that would be good to still apply maybe.
All right, great answers. Now we're going to open it up to some Q&A questions that have been coming in. A really popular one is, how did you go about finding and also funding your gap year opportunities? Emphasis on where are you getting the money?
Well, as someone that is funding medical school using the money I made during my gap year, I feel like this is a little bit of the opposite situation. I lived at home, so I saved money there. I drove a 1999 Camry, which broke down on the 101. So, I made it work, and I'm able to pretty much pay for my whole first year, with money that I earned, which is I don't know, it makes me really proud. It makes me feel like an adult. And I think it's totally possible to earn money. I know that living in California is super expensive, and I had the privilege of living with my parents, even if I didn't feel that way in the moment. But it is possible to save, and I think there are definitely good opportunities to be had where you can make a decent salary. There's good benefits. I know this sounds really boring to listen to, but definitely consider those things if possible. And as far as finding jobs, I applied to a bunch of different things. I wasn't sure what I wanted. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I didn't know that I was 100% going into medicine. So I was just looking for jobs that were within a decent distance. And then I was looking at those adult benefits, taxes, retirement plans, all those good things. And that's how I ended up picking what I did. Of course, I tried to pick something that fit in with my major. I didn't want to feel like I spent thousands of dollars on an undergrad degree that I didn't use. So that was the other criteria for me. But I think it's really a very individual thing. And it's important to do a job that interests you, because I think coming from undergrad, you're used to using your mind a lot and working hard and just being very I don't know, invested in what you're doing. And to go into a job where you don't feel that passion, it's going to be really hard to stick with that job, especially if you're going to do more than one gap year. So I would just think about it if possible. And I know that it's not always an option to, have a bunch of choices in front of you. And sometimes you just pick what comes your way. But I think when you're applying, to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think as you've seen in our panel, a lot of people did a lot of really different things. And I would definitely suggest casting your net wide when you're applying to or thinking about gap year opportunities. I personally applied to or thought about kind of a million different things. I looked at Teach for America, so teaching. There's a Teach for America sort of equivalent where you're in France, because I was a French major, so I applied to that. Health policy was something that I started to be interested in my senior year, but didn't have time to explore that much, so I was looking to health policy jobs. Healthcare consulting was kind of a big buzzword at my school. A lot of people did consulting, so I was looking into that. Research seemed like perhaps the most logical because it's what I'd done before, and I feel like it's kind of a typical gap year activity, and a good one for a lot of people, but don't feel like you have to do research. So I ended up doing a research program, and I definitely echo what Megan said. Try to find something that really interests you and that will keep you engaged the whole year, because it's a very different mindset than being in school, where I feel like you kind of have a sense of like, oh, I'm taking this class, even if I don't love it, I know where I'm going and I know I'm taking it, and it's part of like this process. And I think someone said this, I'm not sure who said it before, the gap year, like I overall enjoyed my gap year, but there were moments when I felt sort of like, not that I was standing still exactly, but that I could be moving forward and I could be more directly contributing to my general medical track. So picking something you're interested in, but then again, it's only 1, 2, 3 fill in the blank years. So you're applying and you're saying medicine is the thing I most want to do with my life and what I want to dedicate my life to. So it doesn't have to be, I don't know. It doesn't have to be like the perfect thing for your gap year, because medicine's where you're going. But hopefully you enjoy it too.
I mean, one thing, I'm not sure if this is like a universal type of program, but if you do decide to go for a master's degree or a conjoint program degree, some universities offer paid tuition if you work as a teaching assistant. So I worked as a teaching assistant as an undergraduate and a graduate student. And as a graduate student, my tuition was paid for and I received a stipend of like $1,200 a month or something. So if you're willing to teach and work for a university, that could also be a feasible option.
And if you teach lab, I believe all UCs, if you teach lab, your pay is increased.
I wasn't going to do that, man. The grading was too much.
I also want to give a quick shout out to tech. That's definitely one industry that is super, super lucrative. And I found myself, when I transitioned from my research job to my tech job, my salary like doubled. Not to say that that's why I did it at all, but that was obviously a very nice perk. And you might think that, oh, I'm not a coder or I didn't study engineering. A lot of companies, I mean, at all tech companies, the percentage of engineers there is very, very low compared to all the other people, and they get the exact same benefits, have extremely high pay, and you get really, I would say, like more applicable knowledge to medicine, things like, again, how to like manage a business or things about global strategy or even just market strategy. Those are sorts of things that you can get involved into. So I personally loved working on a small team for a quote unquote startup, even though my company had like 250 people. And definitely working in tech was very interesting, very exciting, and had a lot of great benefits if you're thinking about funding specifically.
Yeah, just a last comment from me. Just, it's 1 year that you can do something very different. So if there is a domain like tech or fill in the blank with whatever you're interested in and you want to explore that for a year, definitely, I really encourage that. It does not have to be directly medicine related. It is your story, and hopefully it contributes to somehow your interest and your path to medicine, but it does not have to be direct, cancer, bio, wet lab, that kind of thing. Just yes, be open-minded about the different gap year things you can do.
I also just want to acknowledge that I know it's going to be different when we're speaking about what opportunities we had and what jobs we were able to get than maybe like right now. It's something that I know I talked to Brittany about earlier. So keeping that in mind, I don't think that it really matters exactly what job you get. It doesn't have to be, in clinical research or basic science research or anything like that. Any job that you feel that you can do for your gap years and that you'd be happy to do is a perfectly good job. So apply to anything that you think you'd be happy doing. Don't feel limited and don't feel like, oh, there's no way that I can, get the scribe job now that we're in this situation. And I also want to say that I have friends that, you know, didn't start working until like September, October, and like took 1 or 2 gap years, and they were doing other things. They were, you know, spending time on themselves because they just graduated and, you know, they deserve that break. So, you know, don't feel the pressure to start working immediately. Like for me, that was important because of finance reasons, but, you know, that's not true for everyone. So it's really up to your own personal circumstance.
Right. And I do want to again echo the fact that even though it seems like we're painting a very clear-cut picture of, you know, I followed this path, I did this job and then this, you know, at every single step I was freaking out. I was saying what was going to be my next job. I applied to things all over the spectrum, similar to Brittany, healthcare consulting, obviously tech, Fulbright education, like all these sorts of things. And for me, I just kind of thought, you know, I'll cast a wide net, see what catches, and just let my journey go from there. But, you know, I think if you're taking a gap year and you don't set yourself up with something that's like 1 or 2 years specifically, like an academic degree, then you have to be a little bit more flexible in terms of what you might be interested in, because there's tons that you could work in. It's really just about like a little bit of luck, honestly, and chance, as well as, you know, having passion and seeing what really is exciting to you.
Thanks, guys, for answering that. I have another really timely question since AMCAS has opened. So for students applying this cycle who are wanting to take 1 gap year, say, how do they write that in their AMCAS application if they're not exactly sure what they're going to be doing over the next year? And for those who took multiple gap years, like how did you write about your gap year experience in your AMCAS? If you can remember that far back.
Sorry, I just want to, can you clarify the question a little bit? The first part is that the MCAS has already opened and that you want us to talk about how we write about our gap year?
Yeah, the question is, especially for those who are planning only to take a gap year and they haven't 1 gap year and haven't really started that, like how do you write about that in your application? Since the application is submitted like before you even do your gap year.
Oh, okay. So I understand. So like basically you're going to be going into a gap year, your application year, and how can we translate what you'll be doing in that year to medical school?
Exactly.
Oh, I think for me, it was just secondary. In a lot of secondaries, I read that, in this upcoming, like I think many schools, there is a space that allow you to express what will you be doing during this application year, and that's a good place. And I think if that secondary doesn't have that option, I would just wave it into some of my other secondary prompts saying that in this upcoming year, I'll be continuing doing this and that. Like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I started my position in end of August, early September of my application cycle. So I really didn't have much to say about it before I'd started. And I wrote about it a bit in some secondaries, but it's even a little late in the secondary timeline. So most of the discussion of that was for me through interviews when they would ask me like, what have you been doing this year? Or there are some update letters that you can send. It depends on the school how many they accept, so check. But most schools accept 1 or 2 updates where you can say, oh, I was involved in this since I turned in my primary or secondary. It's been important to me. I wanted to say how it contributes to my application and my desire to be in medicine. So there are opportunities during the application cycle where you can talk about that. But I think Louie's right. That's probably the best place. Almost, well, I think the majority of applications on the secondaries will have a space, or you can be creative and fit it in. Really, that's the thing about the application process in general. If you have something you want to say, think about where you can say that, even if they didn't ask directly, what are you doing for your gap year, that sort of thing.
That's great. And for Manny and Angie, who took 3 years, how much did you talk about your gap year during your interview experience and in your application? And were you asked about them more often than undergrad, or kind of how does that work during that process?
Okay, I'll take that head nod as a cue. So for me, since I applied technically during my second gap year, not knowing that I was going to take a third gap year, I did talk about my Fulbright experience quite a bit, but obviously not very much about my tech data startup experience. That was actually probably the foundation of my personal statement, my medical school personal statement. And I started writing that at the end of my Fulbright experience. So I thought, I mean, it really shaped me. But that was my personal experience. I actually had trouble thinking back to my undergrad experiences during my interviews, just because so
Same.
much time, so much time had passed, and obviously more recent memories are fresher, but I also felt that they were more substantial because I just had way more, I guess, opportunities, and I was really excited about certain things. So, I mean, I think at a lot of interviews, I was able to sort of guide what we talked about, and just whatever was important to me. You know, you like have a couple of things that you remember about certain experiences that you like prepare. And I just sort of tried to guide the conversation as much as possible to what I knew I would be excited talking about, and so that I could share that passion. What about you, man?
I'd say the undergraduate questions were a lot more difficult because it had been a lot longer. I remember it was like 2019, and I had an interviewer ask me about a class I took in 2014 and how I felt about it. And so that was kind of difficult. Um, what I would say is that I made it a story. So, you know, when you're applying for these applications, you are selling yourself and you have some kind of a message about what got you into medicine. So, in that sense, what I studied undergraduate and the interest I showed in undergraduate, I tried to build on to an extent in my gap years as a continuation of that story. And I think that the experience I had in having 3 gap years also kind of made me seem more maybe of a mature applicant in the sense that I had had the opportunity to see things other than the academic life. And not to disparage people who do the straight shot, but in my own experience, um, having taken those gap years allowed me a lot more to kind of put my education in context and kind of explain how I wanted to grow and develop and how I did grow and develop outside of academics. Because everything I was doing was, I mean, I was still doing graduate school, but it was a very different experience. So I think talking about the gap years is not as difficult. In regards to speaking about, let's say you're taking a single gap year. So my 3rd gap year, I was in the application process, and I didn't find it that hard to kind of explain what I was doing as long, well, because I started working at my job for my 3rd gap year prior to the beginning of the applications interview process. So I believe that if you start at your gap year experience prior to the interviews and prior to secondaries, it makes it a lot easier, even if it's only like a month or something of experience.
Perfect. That is very helpful. Another kind of technical question about the application process for those who take gap years is recommendation letters. Did you focus on getting letters from, you know, your boss during your gap year or people involved in that time, or more in the undergraduate experience? Maybe one person can answer that.
I'll just quickly say that I actually got all of my letters of recommendation during undergrad. So like if I'd completed a class or if I'd like TA'd for a professor, then I would ask them after the end of the course if they could like if they could write me a letter. And so based on my pre-health advising team's like recommendations, they said, oh, you needed X letters of recommendation. I don't remember what the exact number is, but they give you something. And so I followed that. And by the time I finished undergrad, I had all of my letters completed. So I didn't really add any more for my Fulbright or for my working experience. That said, it's generally a little bit of a taboo if you're working to sort of let people know that you'll be leaving in a year or in 2 years, because oftentimes they will sort of limit the number of opportunities that you get. And so I kind of wanted to just learn as much as possible and get put on as many interesting projects as I could. So I didn't share that with my employer until a couple of months before I left, which was totally fine. And so I obviously would not have been able to ask for a letter of recommendation from my boss.
Yeah, that's actually a great point, because the next question I had that maybe one person can answer is just how do you plan a gap year when you're planning on taking, you know, you're working and then you're also doing interviews, especially during that last gap year. Kind of how do you work with your boss about that, and how do you plan for those experiences and those absences?
I guess I can speak to this a little bit since I had a pretty classic type job. I think it did help that I took 2 gap years, so I had a bit of an established relationship with my boss before going into the application cycle. I chose to just go ahead and tell everyone in my office, my boss, my coworkers, that I was going to be applying. For me, that just seemed logical because I worked in a team, and I knew that since I'd be flying out to interviews, there was a very high chance that I'd be missing meetings, I would be behind on certain tasks, and I wanted everyone to be aware that if they were going to help me keep up with my workload, that they were aware ahead of time. So that was my personal choice. There were people that worked in my group that also applied to medical school at the same time I did and did not mention it to anybody. And again, that's a personal choice. So I think both methods work. The positive of being totally transparent is that not only are people super supportive for the most part and ask you for updates, and it feels really nice to come into work and people are curious about what's going on with you. And so that's really nice. But I think it does help just with comfort when you ask for a day off, you say exactly why you're taking the day off, and say where you're going. And if you're super tired after being jet lagged from being on the East Coast, people will understand that too. So it just makes things a little bit more convenient. And I guess I had a really nice boss who, when I told him that I was applying to med school, even asked if I wanted a letter from him. At that point, I'd already, figured out my letters, but he was just super, super friendly. So I think being transparent is great. But I also mentioned at the very beginning when I started my job that I was thinking about medical school. I mentioned that I had not taken MANCAT. I didn't have a definitive timeline, but from the very start, I was kind of open about what I was considering. And I think that made that process easy. It wasn't a surprise to anyone that I ended up choosing to apply to med school. So I mean, I personally would say transparency is best, but I mean, again, it depends on the situation and what you feel.
Yeah, I just have one quick thing to say. When I first started my UCSF research job, one of the reasons that I ended up transitioning jobs is I told my my PI that I was going to be applying to medical school, and she kind of freaked out and she said, I might think about making you part-time. And like, she had a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, which she later sort of regretted and apologized for. But that's sort of what made me scared, I guess, to tell my future employer that I might be applying to medical school. So it's really just so dependent on the relationship that you have with your employer and the team. And it's obviously a personal decision, but there are pros and cons to both, as Megan said.
All right, so we have about 10 minutes left to this session. I just want to ask 2 more questions. Not everyone has to answer, but the first is, how have your gap year activities influenced your med school experience, if at all? So take that as you will, but one idea is a lot of people in our class were scribes or EMTs, and so that clinical knowledge really comes more easily to them. If anyone wants to touch on that.
I feel like my gap year experiences have shaped my med school experience quite a bit. And this is the sort of big question, so I'll be formulating as I talk. Hopefully it will go well. But so I was in a research position. So in terms of the topic of the research, I really enjoyed it. It was on a retinal disease. So I've continued with some eye research here, but then I also realized that I really missed patient interaction and that I wanted research to be a part of my medical career, but maybe not the sole focus. So I think that was enlightening for me. It was nice to have like a whole year just to dedicate to research to see what that was like and get that information. I realized, I mentioned before, I worked with children, and I realized that that's really something that I enjoy. So here in LA, I've been searching for opportunities to do similar things. And I've been looking more into, for example, pediatrics or pediatric specialties. One sort of random specific thing is that one of my coworkers spoke Spanish, and a number of my friends who I happened to make that year also spoke Spanish. So because of them, I wanted to learn Spanish. And it has been really helpful here. I'm one of the leaders of the Medical Spanish Interest Group. And I found it super useful when I'm talking to patients. Sometimes they'll be Spanish speaking patients. So that was a bit random. And then the last thing is I happened to work with a group in my lab that was very international. And I just thought that was so amazing that all these people from very, very different backgrounds and different parts of the world and cultures were together. And I realized that that is something I really value with a team, research or otherwise. So that's been something I have been looking for, and also global health. That's the last thing I'll mention. It was something I was sort of interested in college but didn't have any experience with, and it's something that now I really want to pursue more. And I was originally planning to participate in this summer, although I do not think that's going to happen, but in the future. So in summary, yes, it influenced, I think, my med school career so far a lot in random ways.
I would say having done research, like having got a secondary degree, I think I learned a lot about what to look for in a laboratory, especially if you're going to be working in them in medical school, which you will. I think most of us are going to be involved in some degree of research in medical school. So personally, joining a lab prior to entering medical school, going through graduate school, working through that in my gap years, it gave me like the hard skills about how to write a paper or how to conduct an experiment. It kind of gave me some of the interpersonal skills too, about how to find a mentor, because I think that when you do research or do any kind of a project, mentors are extremely important. And I think you have to be able to discern when you join a lab whether you're going to get the support and help that you need or not. And I think having worked in labs that I enjoyed, having worked in labs that I enjoyed and labs that I had more difficulties with, I kind of learned how to tell whether I'd be in a lab that supported me or not.
This is going to sound super adult and kind of weird, but I mean, from my job, I feel like I took away a big lesson in understanding what higher level management is like, and understanding that that's what the work field is like, and that's what it's going to be like no matter what job you do. Even if you're a doctor, you're not on your own. And I think going through college, you feel like this independent spirit. You feel like you can do anything. You know, if you pave your way, you can achieve your biggest dreams, and people sell you on that. But not to say that working was a reality check, but I think it really grounded me and helped me understand what the limitations are in trying to achieve change and trying to accomplish your goals. And I think that's really valuable to, you know, have as a lesson in your life in general. And I think going into med school, it really gave me perspective on what I wanted to do and let me like set realistic goals. I don't know if that's going to make sense to everyone, but I think eventually it will make sense to everyone.
Preach.
+1 to that.
Yeah, a major theme is transferable skills, which I know is sort of a buzzword, but really anything you do, anything will have transferable skills to medicine, and whether it be organization, paper writing, communication, working with other people, leading people, dealing with creative thinking and failure and that sort of thing. So another plug for just being creative and with your gap year search, anything really can work for your gap year, because you will learn things that will work in medicine.
Yeah, it's very clear that all of you have learned and gained some great skills that have helped you be successful in your first year in medical school. Can't even say medical today, midterm. Medical school and beyond. One last question, if we can cram it in, is if you could go back, would you still take time off? I feel like I know the answer to this for you guys. And if yes, we can just move to that. What would you do differently during your gap years?
Yes.
Would you change anything?
Honestly, no. Oh, sorry, Megan.
Yeah.
I don't think I would have changed anything. I think even though I had multiple moments of panic, especially when applying to medical school and trying to figure out a way to string all of my experiences together and create a cohesive narrative, I mean, again, all of it just has added to who I am as a person and helped shape that. And to me, that's infinitely valuable and powerful in my life journey, not just as a medical professional.
I was just
Side note, oh, sorry.
Oh no.
I did get robbed by my roommate, and even that I would not regret.
Sorry, Angie, that sounds pretty dramatic. Um, I was just, wow, I even forgot what I was going to say just thinking about your traumatic experience. But I guess I would definitely take the gap years again. And I don't know if I would change anything, but I think Manny and Louie were talking about this earlier, about having like a distinct plan. And I think I went into this kind of like not sure what was happening and came out the other end fine. And I wish maybe with hindsight, I had the clarity to know that these were all the steps I was going to take and this was a timeline that I was going to have. That would have given me some security, but in the end, it worked out great. So I don't really have any regrets.
Yeah, I would say that I'm glad I took a gap year. But as I've said before, there's no sort of right path. At the end of my first gap year, first and only gap year, I was like, oh, it would be kind of nice if I could do a second gap year and really get more invested in this project and my sort of life here instead of starting med school. I think for people who go straight, that also is a great option if you're ready to go. As Megan said, planning a little bit ahead would have been probably better. There are some things that I got involved in during my gap year. The second half that would have been nice to be involved with. First half, for example, with my tutoring, there's a very long onboarding process that took several months that I didn't realize would take so long. Or for example, I was interested in volunteering at a hospital, and they were like, oh, we don't accept any volunteers who are not here for at least a full year. And so since I was only there for a year with the onboarding, I couldn't do it. It's okay. But I would say, like, if I did it again, I would think a little bit ahead before starting the year about, oh, what could I get involved in outside of my job, and sort of have a bit more of a plan with some things like that.
I also would have maybe talked to more people to sort of learn what they were doing and tried to gather as much information as possible. I mean, it's already great that everyone here is attending this panel and you get to hear about a lot of different opportunities that we've all had. And I would say that that was super valuable. And I wish I'd just done that more so I knew about all the different opportunities out there.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for attending, and also thank you to the panelists for answering all of these questions. Thanks to Reza and Julia for being behind the scenes Q&A chat responders, and thanks so much to Stacy and Christina at the pre-health office for organizing this and being a great collaborator with Med Mentors. So if you asked a question that was not answered, I think we'll be staying around to try to answer some of the Q&A questions in the chat. But you can also make sure you go to our agenda and find our Ask the Med Mentors Q&A form. This is also linked on our Instagram. So you can ask any questions there, and a Med Mentor can contact you individually, or we'll talk about it in one of our next sessions. So stay tuned. Thank you, everyone, and good luck. We'll end the recording here.